Aloha, namaskar, and hello. Welcome to Climate Change Beyond Outrage, where we go beyond outrage to focus on solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. I am your host, Anu Hittel, broadcasting live from ThinkTech Studios in beautiful downtown Honolulu. There are many ways for you to get talking with us. You can join our conversation by tweeting us at ThinkTechHI, and now you can call us at 415-871-2474. Once we're done with the show, don't feel bereft. Join our conversation on our Facebook page of the same name, Climate Change Beyond Outrage. It should come as no surprise that many of our episodes are about oceans. Oceans cover 75% of the planet, and of course, we are surrounded by them here in Hawaii. Today, we look at the effects of climate change on oceans, both near shore, which the Hawaiians call kai, and the effects of corals, as well as the larger deep ocean, or moana, and migratory patterns for cetaceans such as whales and other marine life. For most of the world, Waikiki is synonymous with beachgoers, hotels, and tourists. At the eastern end, in the shadow of Leahi, or Waikiki's iconic diamond head, lies the Waikiki Aquarium. It is adjacent to a coral reef, and while not huge by any count, the aquarium is a conservation and educational jewel. Its director, Andrew Rossiter, started his career in freshwater topics, but has worked in marine issues for a long time and became director at Waikiki Aquarium in 2004. Today, he has taken time out of his busy schedule to talk to us about the big work that this treasure of a small aquarium is doing. Andy, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Thank you. So you've worked in marine issues for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Scientific American just came out with an article that said that ocean warming does more than just warm the oceans. It's also making it hard for marine life to breathe. And, there are messages coming out every day almost about the ocean and about climate change and so on. What do you focus on, and how do you convey that message?
The first thing that the population must realize that climate change is no longer a debate. It is a proven fact. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies now that show that climate change is happening and that it is due to man-made effects, mainly the burning of fossil fuel. So please, no more fake debate. It is a fact. Well,
I love it, because that's what this show is about, is that this is a fact and we're going beyond that. Mm-hmm. So we're going beyond the debate.
Good, yep, I would hope so.
Yes.
And interestingly, it's the younger people of today who are most acceptable and educated about the topic, but it's the old folks like myself that are most resistant if they don't know the facts.
So how do you get this message across to people?
I don't think we as the aquarium really need to be unique in that aspect, because wherever you look nowadays, whatever news you watch, the effects of climate change should be apparent to all. The weather changes on the mainland, the changes in the ocean, the mass events of coral bleaching, throughout the world, the effects of climate change are now apparent.
Right, and so especially here in Hawaii as well, I mean, we've got sea level rise issues and coral bleaching and so on. What sorts of, through Waikiki Aquarium's programs and partners, I imagine, you're working through those, and what kinds of things do you emphasize?
Mainly the biological aspects, because after all we are an aquarium, but those cannot be taught without consideration of the physical, the climatic factors as well. So many of our education programs now incorporate materials on what's causing climate change and what you as individuals can do to help ameliorate it. But ultimately, these kind of decisions to affect the big picture, if you like, really have to be taken not just at the individual level, but at the government and international level.
And what sort of hope do you see on that level? I mean, when we were just talking a little bit earlier, you mentioned that there are certain age group of people perhaps are more accepting of this fact, and others are not. And of course, it's the older age group that's in government at this point and making decisions.
Right.
So what kinds of messaging, and how does the aquarium work at all with any of those those groups?
So the first thing I emphasize to people is that sometimes we get into discussions and they say, oh, it's still a debate, still a fact. So-and-so said this. And generally, it's a very, very small minority of scientists who are still climate deniers, if you like. I always say that the percentage has been worked out. It's like 1%.
1% of
scientists are climate deniers,
That's
climate
right.
change deniers. So I say to them, you know, if you went to the hospital with a serious illness and 99 doctors said, you've got this, take this medicine, or one doctor said, you'll be okay, do nothing, who are you going to believe?
Well, I think I'm going to believe the one I want to believe, sounds like, right?
If you want to survive, yeah.
If you were rational, you would believe the 99.
Indeed.
But these are, as we know, these are issues that are not necessarily rational. They are like politics, they appeal to the emotional side.
That's correct, yeah. And there's also a crude financial aspect to it as well. Some of the measures that need to be taken will require people losing their jobs as we switch to more sustainable types of energy. But the other side of the equation is it's going to cost an immense amount of money and human suffering more if we don't do something about it.
Right. And so, you know, just sort of being mindful of the fact that we do go beyond outrage in this show. And we think about what are the kinds of things we could be doing. And of course, the aquarium is wonderful in that way. It's very much like, in some ways, what the role that zoos and botanical gardens play in bringing attention to certain species and habitats and so on. And so what is the focus of the Waikiki Aquarium? Obviously, it's built near or even on the reef.
It's right next to a living reef.
Right next to it, that's right.
So our focus is on education, conservation and research of mainly South Pacific marine life. So that would mean the corals, the fishes and the other invertebrates that are found in the tropical waters and subtropical waters of the Pacific.
Right.
We're small by mainland standards and by international standards, and we're fully aware of that. But the message I always say is what we lack in quantity, we try to make up for in quality. So all of our exhibits are ecologically focused, there's an education message to them, and then the work that goes on behind the scenes is very, very strongly research oriented.
Now, the aquarium is part of the University of Hawaii, which
Correct.
I think, how cool is that? I mean, you know, I wish I were a student in a university that had an aquarium, you know.
It is. It's very unusual within the US, well, international university system actually to have an aquarium. And for me, it's a godsend because we've got access to some of the best and the brightest marine scientists anywhere in the States and perhaps even in the world. And they, on the other hand, can have access to our specimens, our living collection for research, etc. We're right next to the ocean. We've got an abundant supply of salt water and aquariums for them to undertake their research. And ultimately, having been a scientist myself, I think I can say this without offending too many people. I think scientists are among the world's worst communicators about what we do. We speak in jargon and we publish in journals that few people read.
That's right.
But what's become more apparent now is that the aquarium can serve as a conduit to get those messages to the public about the fascinating, wonderful work that's going on at UH to the public in easily understood form.
So it's almost the sort of the mouthpiece in a way. I mean, of course, all those departments have their own PR and so on.
Absolutely.
But of course, you can take some of that research and then bring it down to sort of bite-sized pieces.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not dumbing it down, it's just rendering, like you say, bite-sized pieces is a nice way to put it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody has the time to sit and listen to, you know,
no.
a long show on the Waikiki Aquarium. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Of course, everyone's riveted to this show, but so that is really interesting to me. That it's sort of a public education arm in a way of the university, and you have such close connections with the scientists there and so on.
It's great because we get over 300,000 visitors through every year, and those are people living in Hawaii and tourists as well. So we can educate and inform them about the reef ecosystem, and the state of the oceans at present. We get 30,000 local school children through as well. And people often ask me, what is the best aspect of your job? Is it the location? Is it the wonderful animals? And I say, quite honestly, no, it's seeing the smiles and the gasps of amazement on those little kids' faces as they go through the aquarium on our education tours.
That's right.
Even if one of those becomes the next Jacques Cousteau or one follows a career in marine science, I will retire satisfied.
Right. Now, you yourself did not get into this with marine science issues,
no,
right?
I got a very unusual academic history. I did my PhD in Bangor in North Wales, and it was on freshwater insects. So Bangor's in North Wales, it's right next to Snowdonia, the biggest mountain, and there's two kinds of weather, either it's raining or it's gonna rain. So I actually finished my PhD in 3 years, not because I was really gung-ho about the research, but I just wanted to get out of there.
And here you are in beautiful tropical Hawaii.
Absolutely.
And by way of a lot of continents and
Indeed,
so on, and you've made your journey here.
Yeah.
So you've been here since 2004. So what is your, what would you say is how far up in your list of priorities is climate change at this point?
It's one of the top three.
Okay.
I go biodiversity, conservation of biodiversity. I go climate change, and I would say ocean acidification. And then probably fourth would be ocean pollution, to plastics, etc. Those are the main issues that we're grappling with at the moment.
And do you, does the aquarium have any connection with politicians and policymakers and so on? Do you do any kind of information sharing or active sort of educating the politicians on what's happening?
That can be the hardest job in the world.
Yes.
Yeah. Because they've got their constituents and many of them have agendas. But we do get telephone calls from politicians asking about certain issues and such like, and even more so from the press, from the local media, whenever there's a shark attack or a coral bleaching episode or something strange and found in the oceans, they generally call us. And I think we've got a very important role there in that we're not governmental, so that we can speak as, if you like, an honest broker. We've got no agenda. We just state the facts as we see them and interpret them as we best understand. Okay. So we can give a fair and unbiased appraisal of what's happening.
So being part of the University of Hawaii doesn't make you part of the government?
Not to that extent.
Not to the extent that they'll cut off your funding if you say something nasty.
I'll probably find that out after this meeting's over. Scientists tend to relish their independence from being hampered by those above.
Well, before you say anything too rash, what we're going to do is take a little break, and we'll come back in another minute. So don't go away, and we will be back. This is Climate Change Beyond Outrage.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. We hear, and you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Aloha, this is Maria Mera, and I'm here to invite you to my bilingual show, Viva Hawaii on Think Tech Hawaii, every other Monday at 3 p.m. We're here to inform, motivate, and entertain you. Join us. Hola, soy María Mera y estoy aquí para invitaros a mi show bilingüe Viva Hawaii en Think Tech Hawaii cada 2 lunes a las 3 de la tarde. Estamos aquí para informaros, motivaros y entreteneros. Apuntaros.
Aloha, my name is Richard Emery and I host Condo Insider. We talk about issues facing the Condo Association throughout Hawaii and talk about solutions. When you think about it, about 1/3 of our population lives in some form of common interest real estate. We broadcast every Thursday at 3 p.m. Please tune in and thank you. Aloha.
Welcome back to Climate Change Beyond Outrage, and I'm your host, Anu Hittel. I'm here in the studio with Andrew Rossiter from the Waikiki Aquarium, and we're talking about effects on the oceans and climate change effects on the oceans. And so what do you see as the most pressing and I suppose the largest effect at this point?
Well, for us and all people who live in the tropics and subtropical areas, obviously the most visible one is coral bleaching. So coral reefs are the supermarkets, the apartment blocks of the ocean. There's huge, huge diversity in there. And when coral bleaching happens, there is a strong, strong risk of the reef being destroyed beyond the point of recovery. We haven't reached that in most reefs yet, but in the past year or so, given the El Nino and the compounding effects of global climate change, we've seen huge coral bleaching issues.
So let's go back a little and let's just tell people what coral bleaching is and what El Nino is. I know that we say this every time whenever people bring up El Nino.
I told you scientists are terrible communicators.
I wasn't going to say that. But thank you. All right, so let's go back to what is coral bleaching and why is it happening?
I'll take it back even one step further. Corals are actually living animals. So the white skeletons that you see for sale in the gift shop are actually that. They're the internal skeleton of the coral. When a coral is alive, over that white skeleton is a very, very thin tissue. And each hole in that skeleton is home to a single coral polyp. That looks like a sea anemone, so it's got a body and tentacles on the outside. Those are used for feeding. So they can feed on plankton. But the vast majority of corals in the shallow waters around here utilize plankton, but the main food source is actually sunlight. So that's why it's...
So they're photosynthetic.
They are photosynthetic.
Like plants.
Yes, they actually have plants, algae cells, single-celled algae that live in the tissue, and there's a symbiotic relationship.
The zooxanthellae.
Very good.
Yes?
Now who's a bad communicator?
I only know that because my daughter wanted to call one of her guinea pigs that name.
Zooxanthellae.
So, yes.
Yep, zooxanthellae. So the sunlight hits the zooxanthellae, they photosynthesize, and then all the nutrients, energy from that goes into the coral. So what happens when we have coral bleaching, it isn't the coral actually dying on the spot. What happens is the zooxanthellae leave the coral. So it's left without its dynamo to make energy from light, if you like. The zooxanthellae also provide the color to the coral. So when the zooxanthellae are gone, there's no color, it goes white, hence bleaching, and it also has no chance of making food from the sun, and ultimately it can die.
Okay, and so the bleaching, even though it changes color at that point, becomes white, it's not necessarily hopeless that the coral will just die, right?
Absolutely.
It could come back if conditions change.
It can come back, yes. But if the bleaching lasts for a prolonged period, then the chances of full recovery are very, very slim. And even if the chances for recovery are pretty good, it still takes months to years to recover to the full extent.
Okay, so we've had these bleaching events, and part of that is El Nino, which is?
El Nino is an influx of warm water from the Pacific that happens at 5 to 7 year intervals generally.
And we were in an El Nino event.
Correct.
It's sort of abated at this point,
Correct.
and we think gone.
We think gone.
Okay,
yes.
we think, we're not sure yet.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that has exacerbated the warming. So you've got an already warming ocean, and then you've got El Nino on top of that, and that's compounded the effect. So we've had some big bleaching events around the world.
Awful events, yes. Liansky Island in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, I heard there's like 90% bleaching there. Kaneohe Bay, October, November last year, I think it was way up over 60, 70%. And in the Great Barrier Reef, which is the largest reef system on Earth, visible from space, over 90% of coral bleaching and 50% mortality. So this is a huge, huge effect.
Okay, so so we have some photos that you brought in, and I think they're ready to be shown, and we've got some here. So
this is an example of a healthy-looking reef. Those are table corals, and
are those here in Hawaii?
Yeah. This is taken in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands.
Beautiful. Okay. So, and that's a healthy-looking reef.
That's
so
a healthy-looking
obviously,
reef,
so
yeah.
what? We've got some big bleaching events. We've got bleaching events here too in Hawaii.
Yes.
What does the aquarium do about these?
We've actually got two programs going on at the aquarium, which we've had for several years. One is called the Coral Farm, and that project contains corals from the South Pacific. And the aquarium's world famous for its coral propagation program. It's probably got the biggest collection of living corals in the entire United States. We've got about 147 species, I believe. So the Coral Farm is South Pacific ones, and we grow them in an exhibit so people can see how we do it. And every 3 to 5 years, by then it's gone to a coral jungle, not a coral farm. We put a note out on the public aquarium website that if you want corals of known provenance, known species, disease-free, let us know and we'll ship them to you. All you pay for is the cost of staff time to pack them and the shipping.
And this is with the intent that they will not go and destroy coral reefs in the wild.
Exactly.
And so, and by provenance, you mean?
We know exactly where they came from.
That's right.
What reef,
so that
what
the
reef
origin.
they came from, yeah, which is very important.
Right.
So,
so there are coral collectors who you're trying to sort of shift to sort of collecting from.
We only ship them out to public aquariums,
okay.
not to hobbyists, and to scientists.
Okay.
So in the past 6 or so years, we've shipped out well over 3,500, 4,000 coral species and coral fragments. And like you said, those are 3,500, 4,000 pieces that didn't have to be chiseled off a live coral reef.
So scientists can use those.
Yeah.
Does it send a wrong message to people that corals are growable? It doesn't matter if we harvest them, we can grow some more, put them back out?
Interesting perspective. I would hope not, because really the scale of a living coral reef and the ability to propagate them in captivity are completely different dimensions. We're small scale, so that's why we, at the moment, only do it to public aquariums and research. Actually, I'll bet you $10 that every public aquarium in the United States that has living coral has some from our aquarium.
Wow.
It's that successful.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And so you've got it down pat as to how
Yes.
to grow these things.
Right, and then the other coral project we've got is one I started about 10 years ago, no, probably less, and it's the Coral Ark, and that is dedicated towards threatened and endangered Hawaiian corals. So if anything should go disastrously wrong in the wild, there'll be voucher colonies to hopefully sometime in the future recolonize living reefs.
So are these on display at the aquarium, or do you keep them sort of back there with the scientists
All
and
that-
keep all of those scientists and the corals out of
all that
sight?
stuff is behind the scenes,
Yes.
but some of the corals are in our exhibits.
Right.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I was, a long time ago, I was involved with a similar program, but on the plant side. And the Missouri Botanical Garden
Right,
has
right.
a collection of plants, as do several gardens here, where they're keeping plants ex situ, which is outside their
Yes,
natural
yeah,
habitat,
yeah.
and keeping them in the botanical garden, and you're keeping, just as you're keeping corals,
Right.
the endangered corals. And so there's a network of such institutions around the United States that works with endangered species, very similar to what the zoos are doing as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a very interesting and I think quite a robust network, you know, of aquaria and zoos that
Absolutely.
that work together
Yeah.
on these endangered
Yeah, and
species.
that's a new role that zoos and aquariums have morphed into over the past 30 years, is
Right.
proactive conservation.
Now, I know that for the botanical gardens, they worked quite a bit with land managers and, you know, folks like the Nature Conservancy or Fish and Wildlife Service for their nature preserves and so on, wildlife refuges rather. And they worked with them to put these plants back out in the wild for restoration purposes. Is anything like that happening at the aquarium?
Yeah, the reef at the back of the aquarium is actually a marine life conservation district, so you're not allowed to take anything out of it. But sadly, it's been so trampled by divers and such like who use that area that there's very, very little coral. It's also become extensively populated with alien marine algae. So what we've been doing for the past 12 years, and this was the first alien algae removal product in program in Hawaii. It's run by Dr. Celia Smith at the University of Hawaii Botany Department in collaboration with the aquarium. Every couple of months we have a community effort and we go out and we literally hand pick all the alien algae off the reef. What we've started doing more recently is introducing collector urchins, which are living animals, and they actually graze on the alien algae to keep it down. And then something we're looking at the moment, an ongoing project, is propagating native Hawaiian algae so that we can put that out there and give it a kickstart so it will colonize quicker than the alien algae will come back.
Oh,
So,
fantastic.
it's
Yeah,
good
so
stuff.
yeah, there's a lot of work going on there. Yeah.
And after that, we'll start looking at putting corals out there. But of course, putting animals back into the wild, and corals, as I said, are animals. We need permission from the Department of Land and Natural Resources, etc. But I think there are some very good people in that department now, and I think we'll get progress over the coming year or so.
So you'll have a lot of partnerships and so
Yes,
on where you need to
absolutely.
work sort
Absolutely.
of with the research, the propagation, and then
Absolutely.
the scientists who are putting
Yeah,
things back out
yeah,
in the wild
yeah.
and monitoring those
And,
things.
You know, and one of the great things about this field of work is there's no secrets, there's no egos involved. Everybody's just trying to do the right thing and return the reefs to where they are. So if one person finds a new technique that works really well, it's not kept secret and such like. It's just told to everybody so everyone can share.
Now, in an earlier episode, we had Rod Sam from the Nature Conservancy who works on corals the world over, and he described a kind of a network of coral managers around the world. And is Waikiki Aquarium at all part of that? Or?
We're not part of that particular one, but we are involved in many, many different networks.
Right, and so also at the national level, there's a Coral Reef Task Force.
That's right, yeah. We're involved in that one. There's actually an international coral conservation symposium being held in Hawaii in June. So we're involved in that. We're hosting the Coral Identification Workshop. So it's run by a gentleman from Australia, and there were, I think, about 40 places available, and they sold out within like 2 or 3 days. And there's coral experts from all over the world congregating to learn how to identify the various corals.
Wonderful.
So great.
Well, we'll come back. We'll need to take another break, and we'll come back. And yet to come on this in this 45-minute segment is we'll be talking about big animals now, whales, and other such animals. So we'll see you after the break.
Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm fortunate to be able to host Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. I hope you'll join in with us every Tuesday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. to see the interesting people we have to share with you their information. Aloha.
Aloha, this is Reg Baker. I'm the host of Business in Hawaii. We air every Thursday at 2 o'clock on thinktechhawaii.com. We broadcast from the ThinkTech studios in downtown Honolulu, and we talk about positive and successful companies in Hawaii. People that have been successful despite the obstacles. They all have a good story to tell. Hopefully we'll see you on Thursday at 2 o'clock. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Kaui Lucas, host of Hawaii is My Mainland, here on ThinkTech Hawaii every Friday at 3 p.m. We address issues of importance for those of us who live here on the most isolated landmass on the planet. Please come join me Fridays at 3 p.m. Mahalo.
Welcome back to Climate Change Beyond Outrage, and I'm here in the studio with Andrew Rossiter from the Waikiki Aquarium. We just finished talking about the nearshore effects on animals like corals, and now we're going out further into the deep ocean. And what I wanted to ask you, Andrew, is that what sorts of effects are you seeing? I know there are effects on animals out in the deeper ocean, but What kinds of effects of climate change are you seeing?
Very recently it's become very apparent that the effects of climate change are very, very diverse and very insidious. So, for example, this year in Hawaii, the recruitment of humpback whales, which migrate down all the way from the Arctic, was 25% lower than normal years. And that has been attributed to the water being warmer and they're not coming down as far.
This is
not needing to come.
25% less than last year?
Yeah.
So would that be an El Nino effect?
That's possible to be tied in, but a drop of that magnitude is really quite striking. So obviously we'll need to monitor this for the next few years to make sure it's not just a one-off blip on the curve, but it's very, very disturbing.
And that's possibly because they have less food, or just...
Well, they don't need to come down as far.
Because
So
they've
the
got food up there.
water's up there, yeah.
New restaurants opening up.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily a good thing.
No, and so for the humpback whales, they don't need to come as far. But if we switch over now to the California mainland and the California fur seals and sea lions, this last year, they've had a terrible time with mortality of pups. And that has been attributed to when the pups are born, the mothers feed them milk, and then they switch over to food, and they have to go way offshore to get the food. So usually they leave the pup on shore for a day or two, go out and forage, replenish the milk stocks, and come back. But because of the warm temperatures, the anchovies and the shoals of small fish that the seals preferentially feed on are staying way offshore. So the parent seals have to go much further out to get the food. Because it's such a long way, they stay away from their pups for 3 to 4 days, and the pups have A, when they're very small, been starving on the beach, and B, when they get bigger, they've been going into the water looking for food themselves, and they're fair game for sharks, and they just can't handle the environment. So huge mortality this year.
And that's again something they found this year, but needs to be monitored over time to see.
Absolutely.
Because that's again, we've sort of touched on this in other episodes, the difference between anecdote and data.
Absolutely.
And so some of this, if you do it once, it's probably,
what
is it? The plural of anecdote is not data.
Correct,
So you've seen effects of on whales and sea lions, and one thing I wanted to ask you in all of this communication, just coming back to that for a second, and communicating science and trends to people, politicians, the public, whoever. What kinds of climate myths do you have to bust all the time?
This is a natural cycle. It's happened before in the past. And we now know that the scale and the magnitude of this is tens, if not 100 times faster than it has happened in the wild, in the past, in geological history. That's unequivocal.
Right, so it's the magnitude and the frequency of events and so on. And it's just that species are not able to keep up with that.
Yeah, that was the second myth I was going to disprove. People always say, the animals will adapt. Well, evolution is by and large a very slow, gradual process, and the rate of change of some of the habitats, water temperature, and the lead-on effects is much faster than the animals can adapt to. So either they adapt or they suffer, and in many cases either move or perish.
So a lot has been said about this era that's being called the Anthropocene, which is essentially sort of a hybrid of this is now human-run.
The era of mankind,
This is being run by, and the course is being run by mankind as well as nature. So it's a hybrid system, and that nature doesn't only produce valleys and mountains, but also produces roads and hospitals, and with that degradation and pollution and so on. So we've got this hybrid system, which we're calling, and this age, which we're calling the Anthropocene. So how do you see us shepherding our way through that, shepherding these resources through that Anthropocene era?
At the individual level, I think many people are conscious of it and make wise decisions in what they do in terms of pollution and purchasing environmentally healthy foods, etc. the challenge is when it gets up to the business level or the government level or the international level, often the decision makers there have other priorities such as profits or keeping people employed or being cynical, even staying in office, because some of the decisions that really need to be made will be unpopular.
Yes.
But ignoring it, it's not going to go away. And to be frank, even if all of us switched over to an ecologically sustainable lifestyle tomorrow, it's going to get worse before it gets better. The momentum is such that it will get worse, but it's not beyond redemption. There is hope, absolutely.
And so taking that message, I mean, what do you do through the aquarium so that people don't just sort of give up and, you know, decide, oh well, we can just trash the oceans and it's such an intractable problem, and you know, you've got the big Pacific gyre out there with the
with all the
with the
being
plastics
dropped
and
off.
that's right,
Yeah.
and all the plastic, you know, I guess it's not really plastic bottles that are swimming around, but it's just these lightly
particles, yeah,
small
yeah.
particles that have now gotten into everything we do. And this is, I mean,
Do you know,
decades ago, Rachel Carson said something about this and said, you know, this is
Spring. Yeah.
And so I mean, we're obviously, we've been hearing this for decades now.
I read a paper last week that somebody done a study on mortality of seabirds in the Pacific, and they said that probably every dead seabird that they recover has some particle of plastic in it.
Yeah.
That's horrendous.
And it's not just seabirds, right? I mean, it's fish.
Fish. Yeah.
And then it's fish that we eat.
That's right.
And so if we eat fish that have eaten plastic,
Absolutely.
then
Absolutely.
we have plastic too,
Yeah,
right?
you're very astute to note the distinction between the big plastic bottles and the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. People think it's a thick area that you can walk on. It's actually small particles, because the plastics go in the ocean and they degrade through ultraviolet light and the hammering effect of the water. Then they go down into smaller pieces, probably 2 to 3 inches, and many of those are ingested by larger fish or by seabirds. And then they break down into even smaller particles, which are eaten by smaller fish, and then into the microparticles, which are actually ingested by plankton. So small fish eat these planktons with small particles in, and it just goes right up the food chain.
Right.
And what's at the top of the food chain? Us.
Well, should we just be burning these plastics?
There must be a sensible way to take care of them. Many nowadays are recyclable.
But when you
So
recycle them, don't they just
they can
I
be
guess
recycled.
they just get back
Yeah.
into the plastic
Yeah.
stream, I suppose, and
Yeah.
stay. So the main thing really with plastics is you want to keep them out of the oceans,
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely, yeah.
and that's something
And
that
don't just toss them in the landfill or leave stuff on the beach. I mean,
Right.
Every day from my office, I got this wonderful office that I can see Waikiki Beach and the reef next to us. Every day I see either somebody tossing in a plastic cup or something when they finished, or a clamshell.
Into the ocean?
Into the ocean, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, or letting loose a plastic shopping bag. Thank goodness Hawaii had the insight and the inspiration to ban plastic shopping bags, but they just let it go, and whoop, it's in the ocean. And once a plastic bag is in the ocean and waterlogged, it looks for all the world like a jellyfish. And
we
sea
know who likes-
turtles
yeah.
love a jellyfish.
Right. So they get strangled
And
on
it just
that.
impacts it in the stomach and they die. Yeah.
Right. Right. So what would you say to people who don't live near oceans? I lived in Missouri for 21 years, and you know, we have lots of weather there, tornadoes and all kinds of things, but not sea level rise and not ocean acidification and not coral bleaching. Why would somebody from Missouri care about the oceans and about, you know?
That's something that I grapple with a lot, because we get a lot of visitors from areas like that, and their attitude is often the same. Sometimes they come in the aquarium and they walk through in like 10 minutes, and they go to the front desk and say, oh, there's nothing here. So the folks at the front desk say, Andy, can you come down and talk to this person? Yeah.
That's where you come in.
The fun part of the job.
Here we have the fun person here.
So I take them to the first exhibit and I say, like, well, what do you see there? And they just say some rocks and 2 or 3 fish. So I say, look closely at those rocks. They're not actually rocks, those are corals. So they look closely and they see the tentacles and they say, see that there? That is a rock. Now, see the crack in the rock? And then they look closely, and there's a little crab or a shrimp in there. And I do that for 3 or 4 exhibits, and they're hooked. Like the attention span and the awareness of living things and how important they are to all of us, it just isn't there. But once they get that little spark of inspiration, a little bit of education, they're hooked, and in every instance they spent 1-2 hours going through the aquarium.
And that's a lot for the
That's
Waikiki,
for the Waikiki
Aquarium.
Aquarium.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is a
yeah.
small aquarium. It's an
Absolutely.
absolute treasure, but it is
Absolutely.
small. And for people who are used to sort of the big aquaria out east
Yeah.
and so on.
The other thing that folks everywhere should realize is that the oceans are a major source of food for people as a whole, but more importantly, you know, if we were to take 3 breaths, 2 or more of those breaths, the oxygen would have been generated by the ocean. A long time ago, we thought that the lungs of the planet was the Amazon rainforest. It's actually the oceans.
Right, and so, I mean, they're really, they sustain life on Earth.
Indeed,
And
indeed.
just like many of these systems do, and so it's part of that system.
And a huge absorber of carbon as well. All the carbon dioxide that we're pumping in, it absorbs a lot of that. But it's reached its tipping point now to the extent that the oceans are becoming more acidic because the carbon dioxide is absorbed and it changes into carbonic acid, which obviously is an acid, and makes the pH higher, which makes life more difficult for many, many animals.
So what would you say in sort of, we have just a couple of minutes left in the show, and, you know, wanted to give you a chance to have a final message to viewers. What would, if there was something compelling that we should be doing, or something that...
The major thing is education. If you understand climate change and its effects, don't be shy about it. Tell other people, because the bottom line is more people have to know about it before we can take sound action about it. And the effects are not necessarily highly visible. They can be insidious, but believe me, they are there.
Thank you. And I just wanted to close with this, just a message from a book that I read by an ecologist by the name of Carl Safina. He's written a book, Song for the Blue Ocean, and in it, I couldn't find my copy here in Hawaii, so I couldn't actually get a quote, but what I wanted to just talk about was how he says something about how fish don't cry, and you can't, even if they did, you couldn't hear them cry. So that speaks to that invisibility of the oceans, and we just don't know what's going on under the oceans, and just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening.
Absolutely.
And so thank you for making that invisible visible, and for the work that you all do at the Waikiki Aquarium. So we will be back next week with, we will talk about Papahanaumokuakea, or the National Marine Sanctuary, and we will be back at 1 o'clock on Tuesday, and see you then. This is Anu Hittel. Aloha, namaskar, and goodbye.